My brothers and I grew up in Darra in the 1950s, in the shadow of the cement works where our father worked. The big kilns and the chimneys never stopped. They poured tons of grey cement dust over the bush, the abandoned dairy farms, the old sewerage dump, and us. And our dogs. We always seemed to have a dog. All of our dogs were mongrels. A bit of collie, some foxy, and a bit of kelpie. We played with them and they roamed free. We hunted down the golden fleas that ran through their coats. Then we squashed them one by one. We cared for our dogs, and they never went hungry. We had a lot of dogs in Darra. The trouble was, they kept dying. In the morning, we found them dead on the wet grass. I can't remember where any of our dogs came from, but I do remember their names. For years, each one was called Laddie. Finally, we decided that with so many dying, Laddie might be bad luck. So the next one was called Paddy. But it kept happening. So there were several Paddies too. There are dogs in Darra that I will never forget. Memories of terror and death that keep coming back to me, just like the view from our old front yard, looking west across the sewerage dump to the Waco Army camp. Many of our neighbours were immigrants and refugees, survivors of the war. Their dogs were huge and ferocious and lived long, dangerous lives. It was a delicious terror, unless someone left a gate open. Someone always called the dog off just in time and then gave it a terrible beating. One white-hot day, when I was very young, I was riding my tricycle on a quiet, dusty road near our house. I sat on my trike, floating, waiting to be torn apart. That's all I remember. I only know that I was scratched and bruised, but not bitten. The dogs were just playing. Down in our gully was one of the few streetlights in the area. On hot summer nights, thousands of insects smashed themselves against it. But in winter, the gully always seemed colder than anywhere else. On some moonless nights, it seemed the only light in the world. One night I was crossing the road alone when I heard a dog growl. I could taste the coal dust on my tongue. shadow of death raced towards me. I remember nothing else. One of the paddies was chasing a cow one day. The cow changed direction suddenly. Paddy was impaled on a fallen tree. The vet gave us some powder, but the wound got worse. One day after school, Paddy had disappeared. Several other dogs just disappeared. I imagined someone had stolen our dog and what its new home would be like. I waited to give Paddy or Laddie time to escape from the dog nappers and return home with bleeding paws and a wagging tail. But they never came back. And after a while, we got another dog. Of course, we knew what had probably happened. Across from our school, there was a weatherboard house, much like the others except for its cheap coloured glass windows. We didn't go to church, so I'd never seen real stained glass. But when this house stood above me, up against the stars, it obviously had something to do with heaven. I called it the House of Lights. One lunchtime, we heard the crack of a rifle. I ran towards the House of Lights. The dog ran limping past. It was all played out before me, just like a movie. The dog crawled under the caravan beside the House of Lights, but the priest dragged it out and bashed it to death. Since that day, the House of Lights was no longer the house of stars and heaven, but of blood and death. One day I came across a dead dog lying in a shallow, swampy creek. I stood there for a long time looking at it, wondering how it got there, what it had been, how it had lived, thinking it had once been alive like me. I knew what that body must look like underneath. But lying there in the creek, this rotting dog seemed to float in another world, somewhere between life and death, heaven and earth. I haven't had a pet since we left Darra nearly 30 years ago. Now my young daughter wants to have a dog, but the dead dogs of my childhood are still alive within me. I don't know what to say to her.